know I'm just talking to myself, but I feel like there's a lot that's been announced from the Warhammer community about Age of Sigmar, and I thought, along with talking about how my first big army in Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, that in addition to that, I would go ahead and talk about kind of the news that has come out. So, my own first army, because this is a topic of the week video first and foremost. When I started into Warhammer, what I was looking for before I got it, or before I found the game, was a way to simulate kind of a mass battle of sorts that was going on between fantasy heroes. I'd look to try to do something similar in D&D, but it wasn't working out, or that fit in with a campaign I was building, but that didn't work out all that well. But I did find Warhammer and went, well, this is a much easier system to use, so let's go ahead and use that. And I started where everybody that did Warhammer started out. I went with Isle of Blood, or Island of Blood. So my first two armies were High Elves and Skaven, and I did my best at first to try to paint everything. What I found is High Elves were too, for somebody that's not very good with brush control, they were too difficult to paint. I'm still having trouble with brush control a lot. I know people are a lot on, oh, use a lot of little tiny layers. That doesn't work all that well for me, because it turns out for me what I really need is just enough delicate control. I'm more of a let's paint in the lines, I need to very much be a paint in the lines and paint it deep first time so I don't have to go over it. Otherwise, then I am getting bored doing the same thing over and over again. The Skaven, on the other hand, I found that through my painting, I have a very tough time distinguishing browns from one another and coming up with browns that look good. That was one part on the Skaven. The other part was that there were about 8, or I know there were at least 40 clan rats. There was probably about 60 models in total from the Skaven side. So that was going to take a long time to complete. But I wanted to also get into, I wanted to branch out. I wanted just a little bit of everything. I didn't want one army that I built up to 2,000 points. Because at the time, nobody at the shop I went to and frequented even played Fantasy. I still frequent that shop now. Nobody still plays Fantasy there. But I know recently with the Age of Sigmar kick that they have started to, but I was looking to delve a little bit into everything. And I think the one army I didn't like was Warriors of Chaos for whatever reason. Demons of Chaos were fine by me. Warriors of Chaos, I felt like they didn't fit in with the lore, but I've quickly changed my opinion on that. I don't remember what I collected right after High Elves and Skaven, but I do remember the 4th Army box that I got was Tomb Kings, and I didn't build that battalion box until I think last year, about either the same time or a little before summer. It was real early in the year. When I was building my armies, I was collecting a lot of battalion boxes and the like. I picked up a Dark Elves battalion box. I picked up an Empire reinforcements box, which I actually still have on. That's one of the few that when I picked those up originally, I still have unopened. I started going into a foray from less battalion boxes and more things that people had already opened that they were selling. So I picked up a Battle for Skull Pass. I picked up the 5th edition box, which was Bretonia versus Lizardmen, or that starter set. And when I got it, it was just Lizardmen, and for whatever reason, a bunch of orcs instead. And there wasn't any Bretonia, so I picked up a Bretonia army later on as well. I picked up another Dark Elf set, the one with a bunch of Corsairs as the army. And from there, that was maybe the first thing I collected as an army box, but I didn't really get into Dark Elves all that much. What I did get into, which came out the February of the year I've been doing all this, was Dwarves. And when I got into Dwarves, I picked up the big army box set starter that they had for Dwarves. I think it was $150. It had two things that you could build as either a cannon or organ gun. Because I already had the Battle for Skull Pass stuff, I built two organ guns because I liked them a little bit better than the cannons. It had 20 Quarrelers. It had 20 Dwarf Warriors that I continue to use as Ironbeards to this day. Ironbeard? No, Longbeards. Yeah, there we go. Longbeards to this. I've always used them as Longbeards instead. And the 10 hammer or the 10 things that could be Longbeards, I built as Hammers. So that was really the start of my Dwarf army. And I finally found somebody local to the area that wanted to get into Warhammer Fantasy and played him in kind of a slow grow escalation league. We played 2 or 3 games at 500 points, another 2 at 1,000, and another 2 at 1,500. The Dwarves were officially my first army, and no, I never got them painted either, which is kind of sad considering that they were the only ones that I played Warhammer 8th edition with. Shortly after the opponent I had said he was kind of done with fantasy, he wanted to get back into 40k and doing 40k things. He was more of a Flames of War player anyway, and I never really saw him back up there again after that. And then nobody else that came up there really wanted to play fantasy. Everybody was into 40k, and I kind of left fantasy behind to jump onto 40k, and there I've done a lot better. I've only collected 2 or 3 armies as opposed to all 15 that I collected in fantasy. The only army the main army I've continued kind of adding on to what I had. The only army I didn't have before Age of Sigmar that I had a lot of boxes of but never had any had never built or had was a Death Army, and I guess that would be one of the ones I really started as a Age of Sigmar. I built that up to what was at that time I think only 1,000 points. I had a few extra things to bring it up to like 1,500, and then when I actually look at it from Age of Sigmar, it's a full 2,000 point army. I did that back in October, so I feel like that's kind of been completed and done or whatnot. So that's kind of where I am talking about my first army. I feel like dwarves are, along with humans and elves, probably the third staple of good things in a fantasy setting. I think they're very different from elves. Elves, you can almost assign them human characteristics and personalities, but then make them immortal or whatnot. Whereas dwarves, they're a little bit more different from humans than the elves are. You can assign them different personalities or whatnot. So, in any case, I thought I would go ahead and talk about kind of all the news that's been coming out this past week on the Warhammer community, and kind of my own opinion of what I thought as far as where Games Workshop is headed with Age of Sigmar on the whole. So I've liked all of these Tzeentch releases. I think they've gone at a very nice pace for them. The Carrick Acolytes were a good start, talking about the Mortals first, and actually releasing the putting up for pre-order the Disciples of Tzeentch, so that we get it in midway through, and then we can read about the Tzaangor and really want to get into it. They've done a very good job of sharing what's going to come later on with this. I'm not as interested in the Carrick Acolytes mostly because I feel they're Tzeentchy, but they're not Tzeentchy enough. They're still Marauders or Chaos Warrior Marauders. So there's not too much I get from them. We're getting a lot of hero overkill, which I'm not a fan of. This was one of the reasons I didn't like Fire Slayers all that much. But we're getting a lot of heroes as standalone units. A lot of heroes and not a lot of other small units that actually do a lot of things. So I was happy to see the Tzaangor release and us getting the Tzaangors and their counterparts that are flying on disc or just walking on the ground and whatnot, but have the bows. And then just one hero, the Shaman. But I think everybody's looking forward to the next week, which is, of course, the primary demons of Tzeentch, the new Changeling, the new Lord of Change, and what I don't think anybody's said so far, but I'm pretty sure it's going to come up, is the new Pink Horrors. I think we're getting a new Pink Horrors box, and I think the old Pink Horrors box is going to be turned into a Blue Horrors box, but I can't say that with any certainty. That's just a thought I had looking at the old models, or the models that they had of the Blue Horrors and the Pink Horrors. The Pink Horrors seem to be a little bit bigger, very similar to the ones we got in the Silver Tower release set. As far as the Lord of Change goes, I think it is a beautiful model. Unlike the Bloodthirster that's part of the Giant Four, greater demons or whatnot. I think this one finally works out where it's got two separate legs, so it actually looks very stable. But I'm not a big fan of giant things in my army in the first place. I've passed over the Bloodthirster, and I've passed over all of the greater demons, the Great Unclean One and the like. I passed over them before in the past, so I'm going to pass over the new Lord of Change. Although, if you take it and buy it as a I assume it would be a fantastic model. I congratulate you on the purchase. And I know this is not quite as big as the news we've gotten both today, the 24th, and yesterday, the 23rd, but I also wanted to mention the Blood Bowl Blitzmania League that Games Workshop announced on the 20th. And the reason I wanted to announce it is that unlike when they released Blood Bowl back in November of last year, this is showing that they're actually paying attention to what is also going on outside of the wargaming community. Because the problem with the November Blood Bowl release is that it didn't coincide with the start of either the NFL or the college football season. In fact, it wasn't even near it was very close to the end of the college football season, but didn't mark it, and it was about the midway point to a little past the midway point of the football season or the NFL season, but definitely midway if you include the playoffs as well. But it showed that they weren't really paying attention to the events that they were basing everything off of. For example, if they were to make a game that involved a political election, I would think they would want to try to release said game either around the time the election actually occurred, because people are thinking election on the brain. Oh, there's a game about elections. Let's go ahead and get that or whatnot. So I think beforehand with the initial release of Blood Bowl, they missed a big target of getting the game out. But I think this, with the Blitzmania and League's official start being February 4th, the day before the Super Bowl, I think they've done a very good job of nailing down something for them. So, kudos to Games Workshop on that part. So, the bigger news was yesterday we released, Games Workshop announced the Vanguard Chamber of the Stormcast Eternals, which I gotta say, I'm a little conflicted on this one. On the one hand, I think we've had too much Stormcast Eternals, especially when I mentioned before the three core, the humans, the dwarves, the elves. The one thing we don't have are elves, and what dwarves we have are Dwarden, is very, very short. Fire Slayers was a swing and a miss as far as the Age of Sigmar setting. But the one thing we didn't really, and even humans are really missing. I know a lot of people are into Free Guild and whatnot, but the one thing we have plenty of, and I feel are at a very decent place, are Stormcast Eternals. So to see more Stormcast Eternals is on the bad side. And I know that if you were to look at the Stormcast Eternal book, they mentioned the 4 warrior chambers. I know the Extremist was one, and the Vanguard, I assume, is another one. Which means that we've got another 2 chambers that will be released sometime in the future. And I feel like if we've released 2 of the 4 at this point, that means we're about halfway from the entire Age of Sigmar run, which isn't a good sign for the community, considering we actually like this game compared to a lot of, or compared to, not compared to fantasy. I think everybody liked fantasy, but we actually like this game and would like to see it keep going forward. And I feel like if we were to end the Stormcast too soon, that would kind of signal this is the end of the Age of Sigmar as a game. And they might go into something better later on, or they might not. But it would show definitely something new. The fact that the old... That one of the old... special peak pictures is one of these. I think I'm fine with that. Although it looks like it was something on one of these demigryphs that's being ridden or something like that. I know everybody's been up on the Gryph Hounds. They're just okay with me. They're not a fantastic thing. I think if we see them kind of as a unit like we see War Dogs, that'll be more interesting going forward. And I think if Stormcast gets something akin to a light cav to differentiate themselves from all the Dracothian Guard and whatnot, I think that's also good for them to develop as their own significant army. But I feel like what we're going to get in the future is we're going to get another, or what we're going to get next month is another Stormcast Eternals. Here's all the armies that you can collect from them. Very similar to Disciples of Tzeentch, a 3-book army book. And what we're then, and this isn't going to be the end of the Stormcast Eternals. So the fact we're even getting this book in the first place is signs that later in the future this book's going to get thrown out the window and we're going to need to buy a new book anyway. So why we're needing to buy a new book now kind of disturbs me. On the Tzeentch, I think we probably keep that one for at least another 3 years, maybe 2 if we really do get rid of Slaanesh. But the Stormcast Eternals, I could see very well next year that we have another Stormcast Eternal. A Stormcast Eternal Chamber drop, and then we need to buy a new book. And then it's like, well, are you going to keep the book that we already have and add something new to it, or are you just going to throw that one out and make us buy a new book in the first place? All in all, it's good to see that they're starting to do this combined army 3-book thing, because I feel like Fyreslayers and not Seraphon, oh hell, not even Flesh Eater Courts or Iron Jaws were too bad on their own, but definitely Skaven Pestilence. This was one of these release periods where it's like every one of these new army books new armies is going to have their own book based on their own fluff, based on with very little rules or very little substance to them, and you're going to pay a shitload of money for them. I didn't like that. I don't like that going forward. The fact that the Tzeentch or the Disciples of Tzeentch book is $25 for about 3 different what is 3 of those armies now makes me look back and really, if I was a Fyreslayers, if I had bought the Fyreslayers book, I'd probably be demanding my money back if I thought there was any chance to get my money back. So really hope, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a new Stormcast Eternals kind of book or collection for these things coming up next week, or in next month, not next week. And I hope we see one of these for Dwarden. I know there's been a lot of talk about there's going to be a blimp and a golem and whatnot for what will be Steamforged Dwarden. I think that's probably off the mark. I think there's a very big chance we get the Ironwold Arsenal actually gets the blimp and the golem or whatnot. And we really see, well, here's what the Dwarven Artillery Workshop has been coming up with. And then we combine that with the dispossessed or main dwarf troops, because they have been very on their own. They don't have much that synchronizes with anything else outside of their own book, but their own book doesn't really have enough. And then you throw in Fire Slayers, and then you have here's what all the Dwarven bring to your Age of Sigmar experience. So I think they also get a tri-book later in the past, but I don't think that's ever... I think that's just a stretch and a prediction and a hope going forward that Games Workshop actually is going to do that. So looking forward to that if it's coming up, and if not, we'll have to talk about what exactly they put out instead. So the final thing, which was released today, or what's left of today, because it's an hour till tomorrow, was Warhammer Quest Shadows over Hammerhal. Basically, I'm not sure how I feel about this art piece that they put up for the game, but it looks okay. Basically, this is probably a very good add-on to Warhammer Quest, because this actually seems like it takes place in the Mortal Realms as opposed to some Tower of Tzeentch where he's got some kind of labyrinth that the heroes have to traverse. This actually is a good way to build on to the flavor of Age of Sigmar without having to build a campaign, a battle-like campaign around it. So I like where we're going with this. Based on what I'm seeing on the hero, all the heroes on this picture here, a lot of interesting choices, I think, and it doesn't say anything too much about where Hammerhal is. You would think with all the fire around, it's probably in. It says on here it's between it's a city built at two different things. I swear we were talking about this during the War of Life, but I'm not positive on that. One of the realms feels very Realm of Fire, Ashki, and I'm not sure where the other realm is. I think that'll come later on. But some of the figures that are here on this piece of art are interesting. There's of course the two Carrick acolytes in the top left and the bottom right. In the bottom left, we of course have the Blight Kings, and who they appear to be squaring off in the center is very interesting, because you've got a Lord Castellan, the guy with the Stormcast dude with the lantern and halberd, but the other guy, which I always used him as a dwarf engineer, or a standard dwarf engineer when I played, because he was the only I think he was one of the only plastic dwarf engineered models in a clan pack. But this guy is Grim Berlichson, officially. And the only place you can find Grim Berlichson is in the Legacy Dwarves as of right now. So it's interesting that they chose him. And all of these characters are very much they're part of their individual clan packs that probably don't sell well because they're not great heroes at all. But it's interesting that they would choose a model that's part of the Legacy set as opposed to what they're saying is now currently an engineer of the Ironweld Arsenal. The top left, again, facing off against that Carrick acolyte, is a Black Ark Fleet Master, and he's also facing off against what appears to be a Blood Reaver, or a way that you could build a Blood Reaver. There's also, between Lord Castellan and Grim Berlichson, I'm pretty sure it is the Blood Reaver standard bearer, but it looks like his arms are switched, so he's got the standard in this hand, in his left hand, as opposed to in his right hand. He's got a sword there instead. And of course, the other battle that's kind of going, or the other little skirmish that's going on to the right of the image, is a lore master, what was the lore master of Hoeth, almost in an identical pose to what he has, where he's got some flashing blue out in front of him. I don't know, something I saw was actually part of the Stormcast, I believe. And then, of course, he's fighting off against a Carrick Acolyte, and there's a Chaos Sorcerer back behind him. I think the interesting part of this is that we've got 4 heroes that are really a part of the Order faction. I'm not sure if I count Seraphon Lizardmen. I think Games Workshop really hasn't included them as part of the mortal, as part of the group that Sigmar saved at Azir. But you have a human, or a human in Stormcast form, you have a dwarf, you have a dark elf, you have a high elf. Those are really the 4 factions of Order, unless you want to actually include humans. So I think, and then they're facing off against Nurgle, they're facing off against Tzeentch, they're facing off against Khorne, all mortals on the other side. So I think this is really going to be a kind of the Shadows over Hammerhal is really going to be a show of the old Order powers fighting off against the Chaos mortals, the non-demons, the ones that are trying to make amends to their gods, as opposed to are part of the will of their gods. So the only other thing to mention here are the Griffin that's at the very bottom, or the Griffhound that's at the very bottom. The fact that, again, I mentioned there's no Seraphon, and the fact that there's nothing Slaanesh related on here is also interesting. Now, I know we've been taught, or that as far as the story goes, Slaanesh is very, it's something it looks like they're going to phase out later on. So the fact that they wouldn't include Slaanesh in this box isn't too surprising. But the fact that they're not is also a sign of, oh, they might be looking to get rid of Slaanesh. So very much excited to see Warhammer Quest. I'm hoping that it's a few more of these narrative adventures. I felt like with Silver Tower, it was very much a, well, you're going to follow this track, and then you're going to follow this track, you're going to follow this track. And they tried to change up the scenario so you didn't notice which one was which, but I feel like this is going to be a bit more branched out, where you go in isn't where you're going to come out in the scenario. So, and you're not trying to build pieces of an amulet and therefore have to play each of these scenarios differently. But it's more of a, let's go adventuring in what's left of the city of Hammerhal. So, and that was a lot to cover, especially on my own. If you enjoyed the content of this video, please give a like, please comment below, and please subscribe. It helps build my self-esteem to know that somebody's actually paying attention during these videos. Especially if you have comments to say, you know, you didn't like what I said earlier, and or whatever. This helps me to feel a little better about myself. But I'm not really one of these big let's really focus in on the news or whatnot. I'm a very casual player, so the thought that I actually put together this video as opposed to just the previous, here's my first army before, it's probably outstanding and showing some growth or some commitment to the Age of Sigmar game as a whole. But in any case, I do this for fun, so don't. If you have any questions or things that you would like me to see covered or want my opinion on, I would be more than happy to, but you're going to have to comment on that below. So please stay tuned, please stay subscribed, and happy wargaming.